The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ramiro Jordan. I'm the current president of IFEES. I want to welcome everybody to the series of webinars organized by the IFEES GDC and IUCE. It's a great pleasure to introduce and honor a good friend and colleague, Mr. Pablo Garcia. He has worked for many years at the Sandia National Laboratories, has by many positions. The last position, he was the Chief of Staff and Technical Deputy for the Sandia National Labs. He has vast experience in nuclear security, non-proliferation. And I want to thank him, give him a special thanks because his group and Sandia Labs believed and helped us organize the first global peace engineering conference that was in November of 2018. So it's an honor to introduce Mr. Pablo Garcia. He's going to share his experience of engineering. Pablo, welcome and thank you so much for this webinar.
Thank you, Ramiro, and thanks everybody. Good morning here in New Mexico. It's about 8 in the morning. So thanks everybody for connecting. And this presentation is not going to be very technical. The background in this presentation is for a number of years, I've been part of an activity run by a non-for-profit agency here in the city to work with some of the public schools in a part of our city that has a lot of challenges. Primarily, it's a part of a city of relatively low income. A lot of the parents have more than one job. There is a high level of dropout rate in the schools, and not necessarily big emphasis in pursuing higher education or college degrees. So this not-for-profit agency asked for volunteers from the community to come engage in a monthly series of talks, primarily to kids in middle school, 6, 7, 8, 9 grades, to tell them our stories about what doors have education opened up for us, and give them insights into how our lives and our careers develop because we were able to go to school. Okay, so that's how this talk started, and I have continued to give this talk at the public schools throughout the city, also online. And so let me share with you, how we try to go after, I'll call it the hearts and minds of the kids. And especially in my talk, I'm trying to promote engineering as a great career. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. So you can see my screen now, Ramiro. That should be okay, right?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So again, my name is Pablo Garcia. As Ramiro said, I work at Sandia National Labs for over 34 years in many different capacities. I started as an engineer, then later became a department manager with about 15 people in my group. Later a senior manager up to 100, 120 people and different kind of program roles. And for those of you who are not familiar with Sandia National Labs, Sandia is one of 17 national labs that exist in the US. They're all under the US Department of Energy. Some of the labs are, I'll call it single purpose or smaller, or perhaps they have a science focus. You're gonna have the Stanford Linear Accelerator at Stanford University, for example. But there are 3 of the labs that are the largest, and the most famous of all 17 is going to be Los Alamos. Los Alamos National Labs is well known worldwide. Also here in New Mexico, about 130 kilometers from where I live. And Sandia is the largest of all 17 national labs. We have about 12,000 employees and a few more if you add a few other contractors. So I like to say there are about 13,000 belly buttons any given day at the lab. And being the largest of the lab, we work in many different areas, and we like to say that Sandia is the only science-based engineering lab in the US. All their labs are more science or focused on energy and other topics, but Sandia is the one that is defined as the science-based engineering lab. I'm retired recently, about a year ago. I'm still very active in activities related to non-proliferation and promoting STEM education. And one of my side hobbies is I'm a photographer, nature photographer. So anybody who's interested in photography can go to my website, pablogphoto.com, and I even have a YouTube channel in Spanish and English. So I'm putting a plug for my channel there. So let's get started. And as I was telling you, this talk started by trying to promote education with younger kids in the middle schools here in the city of Albuquerque. So as I introduce myself, I tell them I'm Pablo. You'll notice that I have an accent, a Spanish accent. I grew up on the Mexican side of the border, about 4-hour drive south from where I live in Albuquerque. I was born in El Paso, but I grew up on the Mexican side. I went to school all the way through high school on the Mexican side of the border. My parents had a small grocery store. Our house was on the back of the store. And my parents grew up in a small town in another state on north central Mexico. My family had settled there over 200 years ago. And it was a hard life, like many people that live in rural areas, right? My parents only had the opportunity to go through 4th grade. That was all the education that was available in the small town where they live near the mountains of the Sierra Madre, or the main mountains in Mexico. And so they really wanted to push education on their kids. On my siblings, all of us went to school. And so they really saw education as a way to progress, as a way to better life. They worked very hard. They were able to give us a good life, but it was, very hard work for them with the store, opening at 7 in the morning or 6:30 in the morning, keeping the store late until late. Later, they were able to do better and open a couple other stores and provide well for us. But they really wanted to push education as the way forward for us. I was a good student. When I was in 6th grade, I was able to represent my school in an academic contest. This academic contest for the district where the school was actually run all over Mexico every year, and it still happens today. And I was able to win that contest. And the award for being first place in the district was a trip to Mexico City with 2,000 kids from all over Mexico. And here in the central photo, I don't know, you can see my mouth, that's me right there in the courtyard of Mexico's Palace, downtown Mexico City, with the kids from my state. And so from early years, I really enjoy studying. Because I won this contest, I also got a scholarship to go to a private high school. And there's where my interest in technology started. I had the opportunity to take a shop class, learning about vacuum tubes, built a radio with vacuum tubes, even starting using tools, and even built a house for my dog with windows and insulation. And that's how my hands-on activities started. Later, I was able to finish high school education in the city of Juarez by attending a vocational school that, in addition to the regular high school, I also got an associate's in electronics as electronics technician. Most of my classmates at the time, after graduating with an electronics technician degree, worked for the factories, American factories that were at that time in the late 70s, beginning to get built right across the border on the Mexican side. But I wanted more. I didn't want just to work in a factory, supervising production, maintaining equipment, running diagnostics or troubleshooting stuff. I wanted to be able to understand the why, how things work, what was the reason behind him. So I wanted to study engineering because of that. And I decided to come to the US since I live right across the border and study engineering. And my interest was in computer engineering. So I did my first year in University of Texas in El Paso, and then I transferred to University of Texas at Austin. And I finished my career there in the electrical and computer engineering department at University of Texas at Austin. A great university. I also work with the department. I pay my way through college. I work part-time, tutoring, digital systems, for 12, 15 hours a week. That's how I pay my rent. And a collection of grants and scholarships and summer work, helped me get enough money to pay for my expenses. While I was finishing, a professor of mine recommended me to a recruiter from Sandia Labs that was in town at the university interviewing students. And I was invited to come visit the labs. I interviewed with them, and they offered me a job. And not only that, they gave me a job that basically sent me back to school. They pay me to go to get a master's degree, and I went to University of California at Berkeley, another great engineering college here in the US and very well known worldwide. And there I got a master's in the electrical engineering and computer science department back in '86. So it was great because now I had a company behind me who not only pay me a stipend, but pay for all my expenses, my books, and everything else. And then I returned to Sandia after getting the master's. And here on the lower right, you see a picture of young Pablo in my first lab. Some of you may recognize that chassis is a VME system. We used them a lot back then in the mid '80s for special purpose computers and boards. So part of my job was to design a special purpose boards, both computing boards, memory, sensor interface activities. And that was kind of my first lab that I had, right after coming out of my master's degree. As I talk with the kids, I try to talk with them about what do engineers do. And I think the kids want to have something tangible that is shown to them. So we started by, what does an engineer do? And go back to the, late 1800s when engineers basically work on engines, primarily steam engines and train engines, and were known as the people who work on trains, right? So today engineering has evolved to being a lot more than that, than just working on engines or working on trains. And I like this definition of engineering. Engineers, they dream up creative, practical solutions and work with other smart, inspiring people to invent, design, and create things that matter. And there are a few key words in this definition or in this description. We work on creating practical solutions, right? People need to be able to use them, not just the experts. We work with other smart, inspiring people. And I like to say that engineering is a team sport. We don't work by ourselves. We work with other engineers, we work with technicians, we work with people in many other disciplines. So it really is about working together and bringing the best ideas that we all can bring to solve a problem, right? We don't work solo. And create things that matter, things that are important, things that are going to solve problems. And I think kids really resonate with the words in this description. And through the work that we do, we have the opportunity to change the world. And you see a number of faces of people, all of them were colleagues of mine at the labs. So I want to take Sandia here for, to allow me to use the materials. Now, as I try to work with the kids in giving something tangible, I decided to use the smartphone as an example of how engineers change the world. And I started engaging with the kids and I asked them, what is a smartphone? All of them know what a smartphone is. Some of them may even have one, right? They know that the parents have it. Smartphones are now ubiquitous. They're everywhere. So what is a smartphone? And I query the kids about what they can do with a smartphone today. And I give them kudos. Sometimes I even bring mementos that I can give them, pens and games, and I distribute them to the kids that give me good answers. So not only can we make phone calls, but we use it as a camera. We can watch videos. We use it as a flashlight. We calculator, computer, email, TV, radio, listen to music. All those are things that we can do today with a smartphone that were not possible years ago. So at this time, I'm gonna stop the screen and go back to my video, okay? My video signal. Now, as I engage with the kids, I bring devices. They like to touch them. They like to feel them. Here we have a rotary style phone, right? Most kids today haven't seen one of these older style rotary phones that you and I grew up with. And what we could do with this type of phones was basically make phone calls, and sometimes making long distance phone calls, require an operator in the early days. So this is how we all started. And then I told them about the transition to cell phones. And here you have the famous break from Motorola. 1980s, early 1980s technology. It was very expensive. Only a few people had them, people that needed to be on the road, people that make quite a bit of money, people that were salespeople or professionals that were on the road and needed to make phone calls. But this was the beginning of the 1980s, and the kids really enjoy touching and feeling these phones. And for me, I ended up buying them on eBay, actually. So here we have the first generation of cell phone. And then about 10 years later, the phones continued to get smaller, and we got the Motorola flip phone, and this came in the early 1990s. And this was actually the model of my first cell phone. And they start to get small enough when you fold it that you can actually put it in your belt, or the women can put it in their bags. And we could make phone calls, but in the phones of that generation, we still couldn't do text. Later, they added the text capability, but it was very difficult to do texting just using the regular numeric keypad. As the years progressed, the phones continued to get smaller, not only foldable phones, but smaller phones like these, right? Phones continued to get smaller, the prices continued to drop. We were able to do text, and again, very difficult to type messages, especially long messages using the numeric keypad. But the phones now, because of the lower price and the size, you start to see them everywhere. You can keep them in your pocket, and the phones were everywhere. And then we started the transition to smartphones. And the smartphones like this one, like BlackBerry, very famous company from Canada that revolutionized smartphones in the years, late 2000s. And these were the type of first smartphones where now with the full-size keyboard, we can type relatively well. I still miss those keyboards. We had a larger screen. We were able to not only send text, but connect to the email. I used to carry a BlackBerry everywhere. I had 2 or 3 of these during the years. Later, we were able to surf the internet, not necessarily watch videos in real time because the bandwidth downloading videos was still somewhat limited with what we call then 3G capability. But this was kind of the start of the smartphone industry, right? And beginning to get some apps that play in the phone. And then in about 2010, Apple came out with the iPhone. All glass, no physical keyboard, everything displayed on the screen, a virtual keyboard that got displayed, apps, and the ability to add other apps, to add different functionality that we wanted to the phone. And this is actually, some of you may recognize it, it's an iTouch, not necessarily the iPhone, but looked pretty much the same. The iTouch was just the music player that looked like an iPhone, but it didn't have the cell phone circuitry on the phone. And today, of course, we get to the smartphones that we all know. And this is an iPhone 6s, it's about 4 years old. It's the phone that I have now, and it has served me very well, okay? So the kids really enjoy seeing the devices, not just seeing pictures of devices on the screen, but passing the devices around, asking questions about them, feeling how heavy they are, how big, how bulky, and so on, okay? So I'm gonna go back to my screen. The next thing that I do with the kids is...
Pablo, we cannot see your screen.
Oh, there now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you, Ramiro. The next thing that I do with the kids is ask them if they had ever thought about what happens when they type a message and hit send. Is it magic? Is it like Harry Potter from the famous books, right? That the message, the characters by magic arrive at the other phone? What happens? And I start getting answers like, it's the internet. And although that may be sometimes partially true, you and I know that the answer is a lot more complicated than that, right? The phones are really the small tip of the iceberg of a huge infrastructure that exists all around us that allow us to move around our cities, move around our country, travel, and this infrastructure knows where we are and how to route messages and phone calls to all of us. But most kids today are not aware of all those things that exist around us. So this is my opportunity to educate them a bit and to ask them to be a little more observant to what is around them, okay? So here you see, the question is, what happens when you send a message to a friend? And you set the send message, and now I have here a cartoon with cell towers. And I play a game with the kids, right? I distribute the shares in the room. I tell them each one of them is a cell tower. I play the phone or the message that is bouncing across the tower as they're trying to send a message from one end of the city to the other end of the city. And I make this interactive on how me, in this case, the message, is moving around during the system. Or if I'm the phone and I'm traveling in the city, how the towers are providing the handoff, or what tower is responsible for getting the signal to and from my phone. And I do those things. I even given the example, I was in Beijing for an activity with Carnegie Endowment for International Peace last November. And, 14-hour flight, land in Beijing, turn on my phone, I get a welcome message from the phone company in China that says, welcome to China, you will need to dial, here are the instructions on how to dial, right? So right away, I type a text to my wife that I arrived safely, and within seconds, right? Probably not even less than a minute, I get a response from my wife. So how does that happen? right? So I take the opportunity to instruct the kids about how that happens, right? How the system in Beijing takes my message, routes it back to the US, how that the system understand that my phone now is in China, not in the US, how the information would travel from China, either via satellite or via fiber optic cable under the Pacific Ocean, all the way to the US, get routed to the city, get routed to my home, for my wife to see it, and then get played back, sent back all the way to me. And I see that the kids resonate very well with these. They're able to comprehend this type of concepts that are not highly technical. But I ask them now that as they leave the school that day, or they're moving around the city with their parents to go shopping, to pay attention to where those cell phone antennas are, what is the distance, how far apart they exist, and trying to increase the curiosity, right, about this infrastructure that makes it seamlessly to how all this technology works around us. Okay, so here you see the computer is playing, sometimes go to the internet, to the mobile towers, and back to the switching station. So let's say I try to make this as interactive as possible. The next thing I do is to talk about the part that is engineering is a team sport, right? It takes many of us, many different disciplines and areas of expertise to put together a complicated device like a smartphone. And there are many different types of engineers that work together to create the smartphone. And so we'll start with this cartoon. So here we start, right, with the case. And we had the mechanical engineers that will work on designing the cases, the dimensions, the materials, the strength of the case, making sure that we put it in our back pocket, it doesn't bend. Do we use aluminum? Do we use steel? Do we use different type of mixtures of different alloys? So mechanical engineers. This is oversimplified. So you're a mechanical engineer and you think this is not good enough, forgive me. Okay. And then you have material scientists and materials engineers who work on specialty devices, things like the battery, right? I showed you before the Motorola brick phone, and a good portion of the size of that big phone was the battery. Today, the batteries are a lot smaller. They're able to store a lot more energy. We have less problems with batteries today with memory, right, with charging cycles. The batteries don't explode. The great majority of the time, there's still issues every so often with fires with batteries. But a lot of technology has gone into batteries that power all our mobile devices. Then we have the glass, having this thin piece of glass on the screen that is able to tolerate drops without shattering, that it can fold. And now we see some foldable phones where the glass will actually bend multiple times. So again, great technology that goes into both on the science and the engineering side of materials. Then we have the area of optics, optical engineers. And today, we see phones with multiple sensors, multiple lenses, big advances in the areas of computational photography, not only on, fusing information, images that come from the different sensors, but the lenses are different. Sometimes you have a wide angle lens or a telephoto lens. All those pixels come together to create one image, to be able to see images better in low light with low noise. We had the technology into the display itself to have accurate color renditions from phone to phone. My favorite, the electrical computer engineer, the phones really are mini computers, designing from the integrated circuits or the printed circuit boards and all the electronic functionality that goes inside the phone, that draws power from the battery, that process the information, all the areas of specialty within electrical engineering, like the radio engineers that work on the antennas and the transmitters and receivers on the phone that allow for the signals to leave the phone and to arrive at the phone. And then you have kind of the systems engineer, typically engineers that have significant experience, that understand technology in many different areas, that are able to do trade-offs. Do I need a higher power CPU or computer, but that's going to require more energy, that may require a bigger battery. Can I make do with a slightly less powerful computer, but it uses less energy? What kind of transmitters do I use? So the system engineer tries to balance the phone in its totality. And then we have the application engineers, and I can tell you there's a lot of interest in the young children on application. That's how they interact with the phone, right? They see apps, whether they're games or YouTube or apps to go to the internet. They ask a lot of questions about what it takes to write apps. They really don't understand the concept of operating system, whether it's Android or iOS, but the apps is what they get to see. They're able to download, they're able to change and move them around. That's how they see the world, is through the apps, right? So I take an opportunity to talk both about the apps and a little bit about the operating system that allow to information to go from the apps to the circuit, right, that is underneath everything. And like I say, a lot of interest in application engineering, software engineering. And then industrial engineering. I talk about production, industrial engineering. The phone has to be able to be manufactured at a good price. There are usually price targets that the companies are going to have. You have to understand the prices of all the components, the prices of the machinery that is going to put the phones together, the decisions, excuse me, the decisions that had to be made about, do you use human labor, touch labor, or do you use automation, or it's going to be a hybrid or both? Where do the production is going to take place, in what countries? Sometimes you can take advantages or changes in labor rates in one country versus the other. You have to worry about, you start adding supply chains and shipping and distribution. So industrial engineers, worry a lot about that. And in the past, production used to be an afterthought, at the tail end after the designers got done. Today, a lot of the decisions about production are done early on, right? So design for manufacturability concepts to try to have the easiest transition to production and the lower number of problems we have in production at the end. And more today, worrying about the environment, not only about the techniques and the materials that are used in production, but about the materials that go into the device itself. And when the end of life of the device comes and we're gonna recycle it or change it for another phone, worrying about recycling, about resource and recovery and reuse of the materials. So a lot of those activities also come into engineering. So a simple device like a phone, right, uses many different disciplines of engineering that had to come together to work as a team to continue to advance the state of the art on these devices. Earlier, I showed you, a cartoonish description of the antennas and how the messages flow. And I added this slide in the last time I gave the presentation because now you start to see a lot about 5G, right? And even one kid asked me the question, what is 5G? I hear 5G from the companies that sell me the phones, right? This phone is 5G compatible. So what the heck is that? And so I tell them, right, is that infrastructure? As I told you before, the phone is a very small tip of the iceberg of a big system around us that allows messages and information to move across. And I showed the different generations of backbone infrastructure, from the 1G technology in the initial cell phone towers with the Motorola brick phone in the early 1980s, all the way through today, the initial deployments of 5G technology 40 years later. And the speed ups that we have seen, 26x from 1G to 2G, 50x from 3G to 4G, right? From 3G to 4G was a big transition because most of us now started downloading videos to the phone. With 3G, it was just very difficult to do and it took forever. With 4G, because of the speed improvements that we've seen, now you're start to see the explosion on sites like YouTube and others and mobile video. As we move to 5G, where because of the changes in technology, the higher bandwidths, the higher frequencies on the phones, we're going to be able to download and upload to some extent much faster information to and from the device. We're going to see a lot more antennas all around us, not just the type of antennas we had gotten used to see around our cities, but the macro towers. But we're also going to see a lot of small micro towers in our homes, in businesses, in shopping malls, in city intersections that are going to allow for an increased connectivity and capability for all our devices. And many different type of devices will come to the market that we can even think about today, right? Technology for smart homes, technology for smart energy to keep track of energy consumption, controlling our electricity meter, our gas meter, our water meter, additional technology that will go into the cars to avoid collisions or self-driving cars. A lot of that is going to be enabled by the transition in the backbone infrastructure from 4G to 5G. The next thing I talk with the kids about is that as you go to school and you study X type of engineering, you come out with a very good technical foundation. And you may choose to stay in that area for many years or your whole career, or if your interests move around or opportunities show up, because you have a good technical foundation, you can take advantage of that. And that's what I did. I didn't stay in one area too long. You know, the labs, Sandia Labs was very good to me. I was able to move around from electronic design to robotics, from painting aircraft and doing one-of-a-kind solutions for weapon dismantlement and environmental restoration. I was able to work on the programs here in the US for critical infrastructure and understand how the big national systems work and what happens when big events like hurricanes and earthquakes shake those systems and potentially the systems come down and what it takes to restore functionality. I was able to be an individual contributor to a team. I was able to lead teams and learn about leading and managing and worrying about budgets. I was able to connect across multiple disciplines and being responsible for groups of engineers, but also mathematicians, computer scientists, economists, everybody working together, and even engage internationally in supporting some of the activities that the US government funds in support of agencies like the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization in Vienna. So you never know where your career is going to go, but because of the engineering technical foundation that we have, we can really move around and take advantage of those things, not only as our interests change, but as the opportunity come in front of us, or we look for them. And I already covered something like this. And besides the type of engineering that I mentioned for the phones, there are many other types of engineers, right? Many college degrees, there are a lot more choices today than in the early 80s when I went to school, or 50 years ago, 60 years ago, where some of the engineering disciplines, electrical, mechanical, civil, were basically what was available. But today, there are many, many different specialties, and many universities offer many different kind of degrees. From things like cybersecurity and entertainment, we see a lot of engineers that work on special effects and the technologies that go into the gaming and movie industry. Financial engineering, bringing engineering principles to how we understand the markets and the financial system. Agriculture, how to grow, how to get higher yields, and then traditional mechanical, civil, many other type engineers, biomedical, working on devices, that understand the human body or even sometimes embedded in the human body, like insulin pumps and so on. And who makes a good engineer? And again, the audience are these little kids, right? So I want kids who are creative and imaginative. They like to come up with solutions. They like working with others. They want to learn from mistakes. We all know many times our solutions are not perfect. We have to be able to admit that there are issues. Sometimes we make mistakes. That's why it's good to work with others that can verify our work. They are curious and persistent, right? They want to understand how things work, why things work the way they work, that they like solving problems and improving things. And it's not just creating something new from the first time, but just like cell phones. You know, we started with the brick phone. Today, we have the generation 5G devices. So there has been an ongoing improvement of the technology and the devices, right? It's not like, again, magic, a device just materializes in front of us. And we want kids that want to make a difference and have an impact in the world. And how do you get started? And so coming to school, making sure we don't drop out, learning something new every day, asking a lot of questions, being observant, being curious, joining an engineering club. Here in our city, there are organizations like Sandia and others that bring hands-on activities to the schools, you know, usually after class, trying to make it interesting, from little robotics games or how to do electrical circuits, or, you know, different type of engaging activities. We also have a great hands-on museum that is focused on kids. And again, there are opportunities for the kids to get hands-on, right? And there are many, even parents can do this, because there are today many games, you know, Legos and others that have a smarts. You can build little robots, you can control them with your phone, so that the kids are not afraid about technology. Finding a mentor, sometimes in the family, sometimes through one of the organizations that I mentioned. When things get tough, finding a way through them and letting them know that all this is within their reach, right? Yes, engineering can be hard. It's not one of the degrees that is easy. It can take 4 or 5 years. You have to stay focused, but it's all within their reach. And I close by basically telling them, be an engineer and change the world. The sky is the limit. There are many things today that we take for granted that engineers and scientists created and enabled from the work in the last 40 or 50 years. But the world is going to continue to improve, and we need a lot of these new, young, creative minds to come into engineering. And that's my presentation. This is how I engage with the kids, and I have very good response. And I'm going to go back to showing my video screen. So Ramiro, that's it for me. I'll take questions.
Thank you so much, Pablo. Thank you. It was a very enlightening presentation, something that I guess all the academic institutions, we need to do more, reach out to our communities. So there's a couple of questions. Let me start by asking that to you. One good question is, what's the difference between an engineer and a scientist?
Well, for me, and scientists discovers the principles of how things work. Those first principles on how things work. Engineers are going to take those discoveries that are already proven and find ways to create practical solutions with those new discoveries. That's how I explain it.
Okay. Here's an interesting question. It says, in your talk, you emphasize the fact that engineers learn by doing. So during this pandemic period, when we use online methods to teach, we're losing an element of skill shortages by the way of psychomotor types. How can we overcome this problem in this paradigm?
You know, I think that's a very good question. I don't think I have a good answer. I completely agree with you. For me, when I was in college, UT and at Berkeley, I love being in the lab, right? Going to the lab with my teammate, my lab mate, working on the assignment that we got, whether it was on analog circuits or digital circuits or software, we had to write a program and, back then we couldn't do it at home. We had to go and punch cards, some of you may remember. So I really enjoy that. And, because of COVID, as you say, it's going to be difficult, at least for the next year, to be able to do that. I think professors are going to have to be very creative. Can we run emulators, circuit emulators, and others that at least provide a portion of that hands-off activity? Can we distribute kits, right? So little printed circuit board kits, wiring that students can work at home, where we may have a tutor or a proctor online providing supervision and answering questions, but everybody's working at their house. Those are the things that come to mind. But you're right, for the next year, it's going to be very challenging to work hands-on, especially on larger teams.
Okay.
I really don't have a better answer than that right now.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I mean, we're all in this and we're struggling with this. How do we encourage engineers to become mentors for aspiring school students?
Well, I can tell you that within the company that I work with, and many times I talk like I still work there, I still have a lot of friends and I still engage with them. We had many different interest associations within the company. Some of them were like, I was part of the Hispanic leadership group. There was a Black American group. There was a Native American group. So those were, I call it, more on background. And each one of those groups then adopted some schools in town that had a good representation of those groups, okay? And we all worked together and develop activities, hands-on activities to bring to the schools. But, everybody had to follow their passion. We also had opportunities to provide visits. So sometimes, especially for high school students, we could bring visitors to some of the labs and be able to showcase activities. We also online made available opportunities, especially for our young staff. When we did onboarding, new staff are coming in, and for the first 1 or 2 days, they're hearing about the company, right? Your career at Sandia is going to be about doing X, Y, and Z. Well, a big part of what we're trying to ingrain in our new employees was social service. Not only saying, consider donating a small amount of your income or your salary to a not-for-profit, right? And we provide an easy means to do that, that then gets distributed to serve needs within our community. But also opportunities, volunteer activities, where they could go and engage with the school or other parts of the community that needed help. So part of that is the companies themselves where our engineers work need to promote, need to tell them that it's not only acceptable, but is encouraged for engineers and scientists and employees to participate in the social needs of the environment of the areas in which we live.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's very important. This is going back to social responsibility at the individual level, corporations, et cetera, et cetera. Here's an interesting question. What about social scientists and psychologists that need to be consulted along with engineers for producing like an iPhone or other products?
I agree. That's why today you cannot say, I'm an engineer, I only talk to engineers, right? So many of the, I will say that a lot of new solutions that we haven't dreamed of are in this overlap across disciplines. How do we bring cognitive psychology, social engineering with the typical hard engineering that we do, and where those interfaces, sometimes we talk a different language, sometimes even words that we use mean different things, and we're kind of talking past each other. So it takes a little bit of time to engage and get to a common level of understanding. But I really believe that a lot of great solutions exist in that overlap that we haven't quite exploited to full fruition yet. I completely agree with that.
Okay. Here's an interesting one. How can we increase the life of our Earth being an engineer?
Increase the life of our Earth?
Yep. I guess, how do we flatten the climate change curve?
Well, well, I think there are two things. One is the technology, right? And we can dream up as engineers things like we can do to control the carbon footprint, and how as engineers, whatever products we manufacture, to be a lot more environmentally conscious, not only about what happens at the end of life of the product, but the energy consumption that it takes to produce the product, the environmental issues to produce all the materials, the issues associated with production and manufacturing, and then the end of life. Okay, all those things I think all of us in this session can understand and resonate with. But there is a large portion of the population that doesn't get it. And sometimes it's about politics, unfortunately. I mean, you just see it here in the US, the issues about not wearing a mask. It's not that hard, right? It's about percentages. It's about reducing the probability of infection by wearing a mask and having some filtering. Perhaps it's not perfect, but every bit counts. But then politics and positions get on the way. And I think as engineers and scientists, we need to do a good job of informing the debate and showing examples on making it tangible, in participating in that discourse, because many times it's about the politics, whether it's at the international, national, or local level. And most of us engineers trying to shy away from those
things. Interesting. There's somebody requested if you have a list of books that about teaching, reaching out to high schools, any books that you come across, if you can share that list with us. I mean, not right now, but maybe whatever you read or whatever literature you have access, we can put it on the web with your presentation. Oh, by the way, this webinar is being recorded. His slides will be posted for everybody to download and take a look at.
Okay.
So
I don't have a series of books. A story I can tell you is, after the first 2 years that myself and others, right, participated in this series about what education has done for us, the school that we were supporting, this middle school, ran a survey of the kids that had been part of the series of talks for the year. And basically the question they asked the kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? Okay, I can tell you that after this 1 year of talks, let's say mine was one of about 9 talks during the year. The number one, what I want to be, was an engineer. Higher than professional athlete, higher than policeman and fireman. In years past, when that question was asked, most kids wanted to be professional athletes, tattoo artists, policemen or firemen. And now, because of this series of talks, right, where they get to engage with engineers, with doctors, with nurses, with accountants, like say, I was one volunteer out of a group, they get exposed to people that had been doing that. And their aperture opens up. So I was so happy. I actually saved the pie chart that the teacher sent me, where engineer is the biggest wedge, and even scientist is there somewhere. So if I added science and engineer, we did really good. So to me, that was the payback, right? Why we need to do, why I do what I do, and why we all need to do more of these things.
Okay. people would like to use your slides, since we're going to post them on the website so can download it, do they need special permission to use your slides to
Let me do this, Ramiro. Before I left Sandia, I had gotten everything reviewed that for use. Let me do a second check because there had been some transition of people.
Okay.
And if they don't have a problem, I'll share them. A lot of the content, the words are mine. The photos, we may need to change some things, but I'll run that to ground with the appropriate people at the labs.
Thank you so much. There's interesting here. Is there a way engineers in other countries like Nigeria to collaborate on initiated projects, as well as take short courses for self-improvement and continuing professional development?
Well, I think the answer is yes, but I probably put it more to Ramiro on how countries like Nigeria and others can benefit from content, especially now that all institutions, Ramiro and I were having a conversation yesterday that we were preparing for today, where for many years, there was this discussion about trying to do more things online or allowing employees to work from home. And usually management resisted many of those things for good reasons, right? Cybersecurity issues, bandwidth limitations, you name it. But now the current pandemic has forced all of us to rethink the traditional ways in which we work, traditional ways in which we study and disseminate knowledge. So how universities, whether in developed countries or third world countries, are forced to move content to the cloud, to move content online. And once you do it and you start recording, how do we go about sharing that content more seamlessly? And in the past, we used to worry a lot about things like intellectual property and management, all those things I think is still important. But I think this current crisis is forcing all of us to rethink about how we get the best advantage of online resources, not only for the needs of our institution, but once we do it that way, and everybody's going through the same thing, is how to increase the level of sharing.
Perfect. I'm going to ask the last question because we're running out of time. Do you really need to go to college to become an engineer?
Good question. And I had a kid ask me that question. I gave this talk online through a couple of weeks ago. And there was a kid that was probably on 10th grade said, can I be an application engineer for iPhones? And the answer is yes. Today you can download a development environment to your home computer. You can start developing simple apps for the phone. You can try them out. You can test them. So the cost of entry, whether it was money, because in the past development environments were very expensive and only large companies had them. The educational cost, because of the newer tools that are available, with graphical designing environments and others, have lowered the technical requirement that exists, right? Because many things are happening in the background on those software environments, have really lowered the cost of entry, both the money and the technical knowledge that was needed to do it. I still think having a ongoing education, whether it's a formal degree or more online classes that are available worldwide, I think all that is going to continue to happen. I personally would like to continue to see a healthy environment in colleges for engineering degrees, new disciplines, research into engineering, and so on, but also democratizing engineering so that many of the knowledge bases and tools are more widely available. I think there's a lot of untapped potential in our youth that for one reason or another didn't have an opportunity to go to college.
Okay. Thank you so much. We have to come to an end. I want to thank everybody for participating in this webinar. Pablo, your presentation was just brilliant, excellent, very enlightened. Thank you so much. And we'll be in contact.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for attending. And, I can be reached through Ramiro. So thanks, everybody, for everything you do in educating our youth.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.